By the time Octavia Sloane chose me in front of the entire ballroom, my hands were covered in book dust and panic. The gala had gone silent in that expensive way rich rooms do when scandal smells close. I stood beside a glass case holding the key everyone wanted, and Octavia stood between me and ruin, calm enough to terrify the people who had mistaken my softness for weakness. Tessa had smiled as if she had not once slept beside me, as if she had not learned where every old bruise in my heart lived. She held her glass with a delicate wrist and told the nearest donor that I was talented when supervised. I heard the room laugh softly, politely, poisonously, and I remembered all at once how long I had been trained to thank people for cutting me smaller. Calder Reed had believed the night belonged to him. He had believed old money, old signatures, and one stolen archive page could make Octavia bend. I watched him lean toward her with a smile built from inheritance and rot. Octavia did not move back. She only looked at him as if he were a sentence she had already edited out. Her hand hovered near my shoulder before it touched, asking without words. Even then, with cameras turned our way and whispers climbing the walls, she gave me room to choose the contact. That was the first thing Octavia ever taught me without teaching. Power was not taking space from someone else. Sometimes power was holding the world back until a wounded woman could breathe. Tessa said my name like a warning. Octavia said it like a fact worth protecting. The difference nearly broke me. I had spent years thinking love meant proving I was easy enough to keep, quiet enough to forgive, grateful enough to deserve a corner of someone else's life. Then Octavia looked at the room and made my name sound like evidence. Calder reached for the envelope as if a woman like me could only be carrying someone else's proof. My fingers closed around it before fear could make me obedient. For months, I had restored torn pages, flattened warped covers, and coaxed gold leaf back from darkness. I knew what damage looked like. I knew what people did when they thought the binding would not hold. Octavia's voice did not rise. It did not need to. The room bent closer anyway, drawn by the quiet violence of her calm. She told Calder that a woman who repaired history understood evidence better than a man who inherited it. I should have felt rescued. Instead, for the first time in my life, I felt trusted to remain standing. She turned to me after she ruined Calder's smile, and the room disappeared in pieces. There was only Octavia, severe and luminous beneath chandelier light, looking at me like she had waited too long to say the thing already living behind her eyes. I had thought being chosen would feel loud. With her, it felt like a door opening in a house I had never believed was mine. Octavia offered her hand palm up, not claiming, not demanding, only waiting. It was such a small gesture to hold against everything that had happened, but my body understood it before my mind did. I placed my hand in hers. The ballroom inhaled. Octavia's thumb stayed perfectly still, and somehow that restraint felt more intimate than any public kiss could have. That was not where our story began. It began months earlier, in a bookshop that leaked through the ceiling and smelled like old glue, rainwater, and the stubborn hope of ruined things. It began before Octavia knew the sound of my laugh, before I knew how her silence could warm. It began on the night my ex decided I was easiest to break in public. I spent most evenings bent over other people's damaged books, persuading torn paper to remember its shape. The bookshop paid badly, but it let me work with my hands, and my hands were the only part of me that never apologized for existing. They knew pressure, patience, timing. They knew that forcing a fragile thing only taught it how to split. Nori said I treated books better than I treated myself. She said this while eating my dinner from a paper bowl because I had forgotten it existed. Nori had a talent for loving people like she was heckling them back to life. I told her old books were less confusing than women. She pointed her fork at me and said, "Only because books cannot text your ex." My rent notice waited beside the register in a blank envelope I had turned face down, as if paper became less dangerous when ignored. The apartment had been Tessa's before it had been ours, and now it was neither. She had left with the good pans, the bedroom lamp, and the calm certainty that I would find somewhere smaller to be abandoned. Tessa came by that Tuesday for the last of her books. She wore the coat I had once saved 3 paychecks to buy for her birthday. I remember that because heartbreak makes an inventory of every foolish kindness. She looked around the shop, at the peeling ceiling and the cramped counter, and smiled the way people do when they are about to call cruelty honesty. She told me I had always made repair look noble, because I was afraid to want anything new. I stood with her books in my arms and felt each word land like water through a ceiling crack. The worst part was not that she hurt me, it was that some exhausted part of me still tried to understand her kindly. After Tessa left, Nori came from the back room carrying tea-like emergency medicine. She did not ask whether I was all right, because Nori respected reality. She only placed the mug near my hand and said, "One day, someone is going to look at you and understand that careful is not the same as weak." I laughed because I did not believe her yet. The shop owner trusted me with the old cabinet key, a brass thing worn smooth by decades of careful fingers. I loved the weight of it. Keys never pretended doors were simple. They admitted there were barriers, histories, private rooms. They told the truth of access. Some doors opened only when the right hand arrived without forcing them. That week, I worked on a cracked travel journal from the old Sloan Hotel archive. The leather had warped from water damage, the spine nearly detached, the pages soft with age. I did not know then that the hotel belonged to Octavia Sloan. I only knew the journal deserved patience, and patience was easier to offer strangers than myself. Nori watched me wrap the restored journal in plain paper and said, "Please let this delivery be normal. I am begging the narrative forces." I told her narrative forces did not care about my commute. She said they cared about dramatic women with financial instability and cheekbones for suffering. I threw a scrap of tissue at her and missed by an emotionally significant distance. The delivery packet included the restored journal, a blank envelope sealed with wax, and a brass key I assumed belonged to some display case. I should have checked twice. I should have noticed the courier slip had been smudged by rain. But I was tired, late, and trying not to cry over a woman who had mistaken my devotion for clutter. The rain started sideways as I cut through the alley behind the shop. It soaked the edge of my coat and turned every street lamp into a blurred halo. I held the packet against my chest like a borrowed heart. There are nights when a city feels less like a place and more like a witness, and that night, it watched me go wrong. Tessa was waiting near the alley mouth beneath an umbrella she had once called impractical. I hated that my body still recognized her before my anger did. She said she wanted to talk. She always wanted to talk after doing damage, as if conversation could make the bruise collaborative. I tightened my grip on the packet and told her I was working. She said I had changed, and I almost laughed because leaving someone is apparently easiest when you accuse them of moving. Then she saw the hotel name on the packet, and her expression sharpened. Tessa worked freelance events. She knew which families paid in influence. "Careful," she said softly. "People like them do not see people like you." After she walked away, I stood in the rain longer than was reasonable. Her warning had landed because it knew where to go. I had always been useful before I was visible, the girl fixing bindings in back rooms while polished people held microphones. Still, the packet was getting wet, and survival had made me practical. I kept walking. The Sloan Hotel looked like it had never needed to apologize. Marble floors, brass elevators, flowers arranged with military precision, a quiet so expensive it seemed to charge by the breath. I stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the floor, and instantly felt like a margin note in someone else's illuminated manuscript. Nobody was rude. Somehow that made it worse. The front desk attendant took one look at the packet and told me the archive delivery had been moved upstairs. She slid a small access card across the counter with the bored certainty of someone obeying instructions. I asked which floor. She pointed toward the brass elevators. Rainwater dripped from my sleeve onto the marble like punctuation. The elevator rose so quietly I could hear my own nerves. My reflection stared back from all sides. Wet hair, tired eyes, cheap coat, a wrapped journal under one arm, and the brass key pressing through the envelope. I thought of Tessa saying people like them did not see people like me. I pressed my thumb against the key until it hurt. The elevator opened, not into an archive office, but into a private corridor paneled in dark wood. At the end stood double doors with an old brass lock. I should have turned around. Instead, I saw the keyhole, felt the key in my hand, and made the ancient human mistake of assuming a thing that fit must have been meant for me. The door opened with a soft, decisive click. Warmth touched my face first, then the scent of paper, smoke, and black tea. The room beyond was a library so beautiful I forgot to be afraid for one reckless second. Shelves rose into shadow. Rain moved silver over glass walls. A fire burned low, as if someone had expected the storm to bring a confession. Octavia Sloane stood by the fireplace holding a porcelain cup, and the entire room seemed arranged around the fact of her. Tall, still, black-haired, severe in a way that made beauty feel like discipline. She did not startle. She looked at me, then at the key in my hand, and said, "That is not the entrance most people choose." I apologized so fast the words tangled. I told her about the desk, the delivery slip, the smudged floor number, the archive, the rain. Octavia listened without interrupting, which somehow made the whole disaster more embarrassing. People usually rushed to correct me or comfort me. She only listened, and in that steady attention, every frantic excuse lost its costume. When she reached for the journal, her fingers stopped a breath from mine. It was such a precise hesitation that my whole body noticed. She waited until I shifted the packet fully into her hand. Only then did she take it. The space between our fingers felt absurdly alive. I blamed exhaustion, rain, and the unfair architecture of her mouth. Octavia laid the journal under a lamp and turned the first page with the reverence of someone who knew repair was not decoration. Her face changed almost imperceptibly. Not softness, exactly. Recognition. She noticed the reinforced hinge, the matched thread, the faint grain I had coaxed back from the leather. "You did this," she said, and it was not a question. I said it was only a stabilization, because I had a lifelong habit of making my skill sound accidental. Octavia looked up. Her gray eyes held mine too long to be polite. "Do not belittle careful work in my library," she said. It should have sounded arrogant. Instead, it slipped beneath my ribs and found a place Tessa had left raw. The envelope was not part of the display case. I learned that when Octavia opened it and went completely still. Inside lay a second key and a small square of aged paper, blank to my eyes except for watermarks and pressure marks under the surface. Octavia's expression sharpened. The room did not grow colder, but I did. I told her I should go. My voice came out too thin. Wrong doors, wealthy women, secret keys, and blank papers were not my natural habitat. Octavia did not stop me by moving closer. She stopped me by saying my name, though I had not given it to her. "Lena Merritt," she said, as if she had found me in an index. I must have looked terrified, because she did something worse than comfort me. She made it practical. She picked up a folded towel from the back of a chair and placed it on the table between us. "You are soaked," she said. Not pity, not command. Observation. Somehow, from her, observation felt like being touched in a language with rules. I dried my hair while she examined the blank paper with a magnifying glass. She did not ask about my coat, my shaking hands, or the mascara I had failed to remove completely. She only said, "Your restoration preserved the pressure marks." I understood then that she was thanking me in the only dialect her pride could survive. She poured tea and set it near my elbow. I said I did not need it. She said, "Need is not the only valid reason to accept warmth." That sentence was unreasonable. It sounded like a door unlocking somewhere behind my sternum. I took the cup because my hands had stopped pretending they were steady, and because Octavia watched my refusal like it mattered. That was how I learned the key did not belong to a case. It belonged to a room inside the oldest wing of the hotel, a room sealed after Octavia's grandmother died. The blank paper was part of a disputed inheritance file. I had delivered both to the wrong person, through the wrong door, in the wrong storm. Octavia looked at me and said, "Or precisely the right one." She walked me back through the lobby herself. The staff pretended not to stare with the exact discipline of professionals who absolutely stared later in private. Octavia kept half a step beside me, not ahead, not behind. It was a small arrangement of bodies, but I had known enough controlling women to recognize the difference between escort and ownership. At the entrance, Octavia opened an umbrella and held it out. I stared at it like it was another contract. "I can manage," I said. I did not suggest otherwise. Her voice was cool, but her eyes were not. "I am offering an object with a useful canopy." I laughed before I could stop myself. Her mouth almost changed shape. Almost. We stood under the same umbrella for exactly 1 block. That should not have mattered. It was a practical object in weather. Yet Octavia held it angled toward me until one shoulder of her own coat darkened with rain. I noticed. She noticed me noticing. Neither of us said anything, which somehow made the silence embarrassingly articulate. At the alley entrance, she handed me a blank business card with only an embossed number I could feel more than see. "If anyone asks about the delivery, say nothing until I call you," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "You give orders very naturally." "Unfortunately," she said. "And you disobey them with potential." I hated how warm that made me. Back at the shop, I locked myself inside and stared at her card beneath the desk lamp. My pulse behaved like it had never seen a woman before. I told myself it was the secret key, the inheritance room, the possibility of being blamed for something rich and complicated. I did not tell myself the truth. The truth had gray eyes and terrifying manners. Nori arrived 10 minutes later with takeout and found me staring into space. She listened to the entire story without interrupting, which was how I knew it was worse than I thought. When I finished, she set down her noodles and said, "So a terrifying hotel heiress gave you tea, an umbrella, and a secret number." I nodded. Nori whispered, "Congratulations on your gothic promotion." I told Nori not to make it romantic. She looked at me with the exhausted pity of someone watching a friend walk willingly into a chandelier. "I am not making anything romantic," she said. "I am observing that you have described a woman with a fireplace voice for 11 minutes. That was unfair because Octavia's voice did not belong to fireplaces. It belonged to locked rooms. I slept badly and dreamed of doors opening to more doors. By morning, the bookshop smelled of damp wool and boiled coffee. I cleaned my tools with unnecessary focus, trying to make my life small enough to manage. Rent, work, Tessa, the leak above the poetry shelf. ordinary disasters. Then the phone rang and Octavia's name turned ordinary into theater. She did not greet me with warmth. Octavia Sloane greeted like warmth was a legal classification she had declined. She said, "Ms. Merritt, I need your eyes on the archive room before Calder Reed invents a conclusion." I asked why my eyes mattered. A pause followed, small but powerful. "Because you saw what was preserved before anyone told you what was valuable." By noon, I was back at the Sloane Hotel carrying my tool case and wearing the expression of a woman pretending not to be affected by marble. The lobby looked different by daylight, less enchanted and more surveilled. I saw 2 staff members glance at me and then away. I wondered whether Octavia had told them not to stare, or whether her presence made rules unnecessary. Octavia waited near the elevators, one hand resting at her side, still as a verdict. She looked at my tool case first, then my face. "You came," she said. I heard the surprise she had refused to let into her tone. "You asked," I answered. Something moved behind her eyes, gone too quickly to name. "Yes," she said. "I did." She showed me the hidden panel behind the library shelves. The old brass key fit there too, which seemed excessive until Octavia explained her grandmother had designed buildings like arguments. Every room had a premise. Every lock had a reason. I ran my fingers over the wood and felt a draft beneath the seam. Octavia watched my hands, not the panel. I asked for a thin blade, waxed cloth, and patience. Octavia produced the first 2 from a drawer and the third from somewhere in her spine. She did not hover, but I felt her attention like warmth at my back. I had been watched before by people waiting for me to fail. This felt different. This felt like someone guarding the conditions in which I could succeed. The panel released with a sigh soft enough to feel alive. Inside lay an unmarked packet, brittle at the edges, wrapped in silk. Octavia's breath changed. Not much. A lesser woman would have called it nothing. I was beginning to learn that Octavia's almost nothings were entire weather systems. I passed her the packet without opening it because trust, too, had hinges. She did not open the packet immediately. She held it, and for the first time, I saw her composure cost her something. "This room was my grandmother's last cruelty," she said. I waited. It seemed important not to rush grief just because it wore expensive tailoring. Finally, Octavia looked at me and said, "I need to hire you before I ask anything more." The contract appeared from a leather folder, because of course, Octavia Sloane traveled through life prepared to formalize thunderstorms. She offered me a 6-week archive restoration position, independent contractor status, higher pay than I had ever seen, and a workspace at the hotel carriage studio. I stared at the pages. "This is too much." Her reply came clean. "Your work has been underpriced." I told her I would not become a charity case with a title. Her face sharpened, not in anger, but in correction. "Charity makes the giver central," she said. "This makes the work central." Then, softer, so soft I nearly missed it, "I am aware of the difference." I hated how much I wanted to believe her. She added a separate folder with the name of an attorney who could review everything for me at the hotel's expense, with no obligation attached. That detail bothered me more than a trap would have. Traps were simple. Care with exit doors was complicated. Octavia sat across from me, hands folded, and waited as if my refusal would be treated with the same respect as my yes. I asked, "Why me?" Because every wounded woman eventually asks the question like it is a medical test. Octavia did not flatter me. She said my repair on the journal had preserved evidence a senior archivist missed. She said my notes showed restraint and imagination. Then she looked at me too directly and said, "And because you do not treat broken things as lesser." I did not sign that day. I took the contract home, showed Nori, called the attorney, read every clause twice, and slept with the folder beside my bed like a dangerous animal. I signed 2 days later, not because Octavia had saved me, not because I trusted her fully, because the work mattered, and because somewhere beneath fear, I wanted to know what it felt like to be noticed without being owned. The carriage studio sat behind the hotel garden, small and bright beneath slanted beams. A long table waited under the windows. Shelves held cloth, archival boxes, weights, brushes, and clean paper stacked like quiet promises. I stood in the doorway and tried not to cry over storage. Poverty makes you practical until someone gives your workroom to breathe. Octavia remained by the doorway as I walked the space. She did not narrate its generosity. She did not wait for gratitude like rent. She only said, "Tell me what is missing." I looked at the brushes, the lamps, the clean drawers, the chair adjusted to my height. My throat tightened. "Nothing," I said. Her eyes lowered to my hands. "Then tell me when something is." There was oat milk in the small fridge and a covered plate beside the kettle. I turned slowly. Octavia looked out the garden window as if lemon trees required intense supervision. "You skip breakfast when anxious," she said. I should have been unsettled. I was unsettled. I was also hungry. That combination would become a recurring problem. I accused her of surveillance. She said, "Observation when attached to useful intervention." I told her that sounded like something a villain would embroider on a pillow. Her mouth did that almost smile again, the one that felt like being trusted with a candle in a dark room. "I do not embroider," she said. "Yet," I answered, and her eyes warmed dangerously. I began with the hotel ledgers, then the guest diaries, then a stack of water-warped account books that smelled faintly of smoke. The archive was less a collection than a family argument stored in paper. Octavia's grandmother had hidden kindness and cruelty in the same rooms. My job was not to judge the dead. My job was to make their evidence survive. Octavia came by at noon and found me bent over a torn page. She stood at the edge of the table, silent until I looked up. "May I watch?" she asked. It was such a strange question from a woman who owned the building that I laughed. She did not. She waited. I realized she meant it. "Yes," I said, and felt the room change. She watched my hands like they were translating something she had failed to learn. No one had ever made my work feel that intimate. I smoothed the torn edge, aligned fibers, waited for the paper to accept pressure. Octavia's hand rested near the table edge, long fingers still. I had the unreasonable thought that if I brushed them by accident, neither of us would survive it gracefully. When the page settled, Octavia leaned closer. Her shoulder almost touched mine. Almost was becoming a language between us. Her perfume carried black tea and rain-washed stone, something clean but not soft. I pointed to the pressure marks revealed under sidelight. She followed my finger, and the seriousness on her face made my chest ache. She left tea beside my elbow and said nothing about it. That became her first ritual. Tea appeared when I worked too long, always placed outside the danger zone of paper and glue. The cup was never accompanied by a note, never by a demand. Just warmth, delivered with enough distance to let me pretend my heart did not wait for it. Nori visited after work and wandered the studio with the reverence of a woman touring a sacred tax bracket. "This is not a workspace," she said. "This is a lesbian origin story with climate control." I told her to stop. She opened the fridge, saw the oat milk, and stared at me. "Baby, the Ice Queen has established a feeding schedule." I told Nori it was not like that. She sat on the floor, crossed her legs, and gave me the face she used when I lied in lowercase. "You like her," she said. I opened my mouth. Nothing useful came out. Nori softened. Lena, liking someone who treats you carefully is not a betrayal of the fact you were hurt. After Nori left, I stayed in the studio until the light went amber. The teacups sat beside my notes, empty now, stupidly meaningful. I hated the part of myself that could turn kindness into weather. But I hated more that Tessa had taught me to suspect every warmth of eventually asking payment. Octavia's care did not ask. That made it harder. Octavia invited me to the Winter Garden to discuss the archive findings. She said it like a meeting, but there were lemon trees, rain on glass, and tea steeping between us. I brought my notebook. She brought 2 files and the emotional availability of a locked cabinet. Still, when I shivered, she moved the small heater toward my chair without interrupting my sentence. I showed her how the blank sheet was not blank at all. Under angled light, indentations appeared, faint as breath. Names, dates, account references, all pressed from a lost page above it. Octavia leaned in until her hair nearly brushed my cheek. "You can read absence," she said. I swallowed. "Only when someone leaves enough behind." Her expression changed at that, and I wished I had not seen it. Octavia Sloane without armor was not softer. She was more dangerous because she became briefly reachable. She told me the missing page might prove her grandmother had protected a women's shelter wing Calder wanted to sell. Then she looked at the rain and said, "She hid her mercy badly." I wanted to ask whether Octavia had inherited that defect, hiding mercy until it came out sideways as tea, heated rooms, and contracts with escape clauses. Instead, I asked what Calder stood to gain. Her eyes returned to mine. 3 properties, 2 votes, and the pleasure of proving I am not immune to family stupidity. I laughed. She almost did. I counted it anyway. The first board review taught me that wealth could make silence theatrical. I laid out the restored pages under protective glass, while unnamed board members looked at me like a temporary inconvenience in sensible shoes. Octavia did not introduce me as staff. She said, "This is Lena Merritt, the conservator whose findings you are here to understand." The distinction steadied me more than coffee. Calder asked whether I had formal credentials or merely a talent for pleasing my employer. The room went so quiet I heard a pen roll. Heat climbed my neck, old and familiar. Tessa's voice, different mouth. "People like them do not see people like you." I opened my notes, forced my hand steady, and explained the fiber analysis like he had asked a serious question. Octavia did not interrupt me. That mattered. She let me finish, let my evidence fill the room, let Calder's insults shrink beside actual knowledge. Only after I closed my folder did she say, "If Mr. Reed requires a second explanation, I suggest he pay Ms. Merritt's consulting rate for remedial attention." Nori would later make me repeat that line twice. After the board left, I stood by the windows pretending the city view had not blurred. Octavia came near, but not close enough to trap me. "You handled him well," she said. Praise from her was never fluffy. It had weight and edges. "You could have stopped him sooner," I said. She looked at me carefully. "Yes, but you did not need stopping. You needed the room." That was Octavia's particular cruelty. She kept naming what I needed before I knew I was allowed to need it. Not rescue. Room, not defense before I could speak. Defense after I had been heard. I took the water she set near my hand and found myself wanting, absurdly and dangerously, to press my fingers over hers. Work became rhythm. Mornings in the studio, afternoons in the archive, evenings with my shoulders aching and my mind lit from inside. I discovered hidden receipts, erased names, a pattern of transfers disguised as repairs. The old hotel had sheltered women who vanished from official records because safety sometimes required becoming administratively invisible. I understood that too well. Octavia began arriving at 9 with tea. She always knocked, though the studio belonged to her. I always said come in too quickly, which Nori would have found humiliating. We talked first about paper, then buildings, then weather, then, cautiously, about the strange ways people confuse being needed with being loved. I told her Tessa once said my feelings entered rooms before I did. Octavia looked at the tea between us for a long moment. Some rooms deserve warning, she said. It was such a strange, exact kindness that I had to look away. She did not ask for the whole story. She only made a place where, eventually, I wanted to give it. When I finally told her how Tessa had made me feel excessive, Octavia listened with a stillness that did not perform sympathy. She did not call Tessa names. She did not tell me I was better off. She said, "Being difficult to starve is not the same as being too much." I had to set my cup down before I dropped it. I wanted her to touch me then. The wanting startled me because it was not the old kind, not frantic, not begging for proof. It was quieter and more dangerous. I wanted her hand over mine because she had made my hunger feel like something other than shame. Octavia's fingers flexed once around her cup. She wanted it too. She did not move. A loose page slipped from the stack. We both reached for it. Our fingers brushed, barely, no more than the hinge of a second. Octavia went still. I forgot the entire history of language. The page landed between our hands, harmless and absurd. She withdrew first, slowly, as if retreat could be made respectful if done with enough care. Octavia turned toward the window. I watched the line of her shoulders under the studio light and understood she was not cold. She was containing herself. That knowledge was worse. Coldness could be dismissed. Containment implied heat, choice, restraint. I said her name. She closed her eyes for one brief second before looking back. We stood too close by the window. I could see the faint silver at her temple, the place her pulse moved in her throat, the discipline in her mouth. "Lena," she said, and it sounded like a warning she wanted me to survive. The rain struck the glass. My breath caught. Then her phone rang, and we stepped apart like guilty weather. Calder had requested an emergency inspection of the archive. Octavia's face went smooth as ice over deep water. She apologized for the interruption, though neither of us named what had been interrupted. After she left, the studio felt enormous. I touched my fingers to the place hers had brushed mine and told myself evidence mattered more than longing. I was very bad at convincing myself. The next morning, I found the bookshop owner packing boxes. He had sold the lease. He said it gently, as if gentleness made unemployment more decorative. I stood among half-empty shelves and felt the floor vanish beneath all my careful plans. The hotel contract was temporary. My rent was not. My life had become a structure held up by borrowed rooms. Nori hugged me behind the counter and called the landlord several names with impressive legal creativity. I laughed into her cardigan and then cried because endings have terrible timing. She reminded me I had the hotel work. I reminded her it had an end date. She pulled back and looked at me. "Then maybe let the woman who builds rooms help you build a next one." I did not tell Octavia at first. Pride has many disguises, and mine wore work ethic. I stayed late, cataloged until my eyes burned, and pretended the rent envelope in my bag was not a live thing. The studio grew dark around me. When Octavia knocked, I almost told her to go away because I wanted comfort too badly. She noticed the envelope before I hid it. Of course she did. Octavia's gaze moved from my face to my hands and back. "You are performing competence," she said. I hated the accuracy so much I nearly snapped. Instead, I said, "And you are performing omniscience." Her mouth softened. "Poorly, then. I do not know what hurt you today." I told her about the bookshop, the lease, the apartment. the way my life kept shedding walls. She listened without flinching. When I finished, she did not offer money first. She asked what I wanted the next room to hold. I stared at her. Nobody had ever asked me that. People asked what I could afford, endure, sacrifice, not what I wanted. Octavia showed me a plan for extending the restoration contract into a permanent archive studio funded by the trust. It was not ready, she said. It required board approval, and Calder would fight it. She slid the folder toward me. "This is not an answer to your rent," she said. "It is an answer to the question of whether your work deserves a room after me." I almost cried again, which was becoming humiliatingly common around her. Octavia watched my face and did not come closer. "I can also arrange temporary housing through the trust, with standard intake and no personal involvement," she said. She said it like a woman offering a bridge and removing herself from the toll. That was when I understood how deeply her care feared becoming leverage. I placed my hand over the folder. "What if I want your involvement?" The question escaped before caution could catch it. Octavia's breath changed, barely. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a second, the room held all the things neither of us had named. Then she said, "Then I would ask you to be very certain which need is speaking." That answer hurt because it was careful. I wanted reckless. I wanted her to cross the table and prove Tessa wrong with her mouth. Instead, Octavia looked at the garden window and chose ethics over ease. I respected her for it. I resented her for it. Desire, I learned, does not become mature simply because the women carrying it are trying. We ended the night with tea untouched between us. Octavia said she would send the trust housing information through the official channel. I thanked her with a voice that did not know whether to be grateful or furious. At the door, she paused. "For what it is worth," she said, "I am not untouched by this." Then she left me with a room full of proof. Rain trapped me in the winter garden the next evening after a late archive session. I sat beneath the glass roof with my notes in my lap and listened to water argue with the city. The trust housing forms sat unopened in my bag. I knew Octavia had done the right thing. Unfortunately, my heart had never once been impressed by right timing. Octavia found me there after midnight, holding a lantern because the garden lights had failed. In black silk and shadow, she looked less like a hotel owner than a secret the house had kept too long. "The storm is flooding the side gate," she said. "You can wait inside." I almost said I was fine. She lifted one brow. I surrendered with dignity, badly. She brought me to the penthouse library where the fire had burned low and the city blurred behind rain. I had been there before, but at night it felt more private, less like trespass, and more like confession. Octavia handed me a dry blanket and turned away before I could decide whether the gesture made me feel protected or unbearably known. I sat by the fire while she made tea. Without the armor of daylight, Octavia moved differently, slower, as if the room belonged to a self she rarely showed. Her hair was loose down her back. I tried not to stare and failed with scholarly commitment. She caught me, of course. "You are looking," she said. "Observation," I answered, attached to no useful intervention. To my shock, she laughed. Not much, not freely, but enough that the sound entered me like light under a door. I stared at my tea because looking at her felt dangerous. She said her grandmother taught her that affection made women negotiable. I told her mine taught me that affection made women responsible for everyone else's weather. We sat with that inheritance between us. Octavia spoke of being raised inside rooms where love arrived as expectation. Perfect grades, perfect posture, perfect gratitude for gilded cages. She had learned to become useful before becoming reachable. I recognized the shape of that wound, even though its furniture was richer than mine. Pain changes costume, but the body knows when someone else has been trained to disappear elegantly. We ended up on the rug because the fire was warmer there. Our hands rested on the floor between us, close enough for the heat of her skin to become imaginary. I told her I had spent years making myself convenient. She looked at my hand, then my face. "You are not convenient," she said. "You are consequential." A strand of hair fell across my cheek. Octavia's hand rose, then stopped halfway. The restraint was so visible it nearly hurt. "May I?" she asked. The question entered my body before my answer did. I nodded, then remembered she needed words. "Yes." Her fingers brushed my hair back with such gentleness that I forgot every unkind thing ever said about my wanting. Her fingers lingered at my temple for half a second too long. That was all. Half a second, and I was undone. Octavia's eyes dropped to my mouth and returned with the force of a door being slammed inside her. I whispered her name. She drew back like discipline had pulled a chain. "Not because you are cold," I said. Her face tightened. "No, because I am not." She stood too quickly, then apologized for standing, which was such a strange and tender failure of control that I nearly smiled through the ache. She said I should sleep in the guest room because the storm would not clear before morning. I said I could call a car. She said the roads were flooded. We both knew weather was only half the problem. The guest room was down the hall, quiet and perfect and impersonal. I lay awake under sheets that smelled faintly of lavender and tried not to think about Octavia on the other side of the penthouse. Also awake, also careful. Sometimes longing is not heat. Sometimes it is two women in separate rooms doing the moral thing and suffering privately like idiots. At dawn, I opened the door and found breakfast on a tray, coffee exactly how I liked it, toast, strawberries, and a folded blank card with no words. Octavia stood at the far end of the hall, pretending to study the rain. I picked up the coffee. "You know, blank cards are emotionally aggressive," I said. "I am learning restraint," she answered. We ate in the library because pretending the previous night had not happened would have insulted both of us. She asked whether I regretted staying. I said no. She asked whether I felt pressured. I said no again, then added, "I feel annoyed that you are so careful I cannot even resent you properly." Octavia looked into her cup. "I have many flaws. Allow time." I smiled into my coffee before I could stop myself. Octavia saw it, and the room changed again, not dramatically, not like thunder, but like a candle deciding to stay lit. She asked what I wanted after the archive project ended. I told her the truth before fear dressed it up. A room where my work is not temporary. Her eyes softened. Then we build toward that. After that night, the work deepened. I found more pressure marks, more hidden transfers, more proof that the Sloan women had quietly funded safe rooms under the cover of hotel renovations. The archive became a map of women making shelter in the margins of men's paperwork. I began to understand why Octavia guarded it like a heart she could not admit was beating. We built a wall of connections in the studio, blank cards, thread, dates written only in my private notes, and patterns visible at last. Octavia stood beside me, sleeves rolled, hair pinned imperfectly for once. I tried not to be distracted by her forearms and failed historically. She caught my glance. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Structurally," I said. She gave me one of her almost smiles, and I collected it like contraband. That became another ritual. I tried to make her laugh once a day, not loudly. I did not aim for miracles. A breath through the nose counted. A softened mouth counted. the day she actually laughed at my joke about aristocratic filing habits. I nearly reported myself to Nori. We walked through the winter garden after long days because Octavia said movement improved thinking. I suspected she wanted to make sure I left the table before my spine became furniture. She always kept her pace matched to mine. Once, our shoulders brushed beneath the lemon trees. She apologized. I said, "For existing near me?" She answered, "For wanting badly enough to misjudge distance." That should have been the moment I said something brave. Instead, I looked at the wet glass above us and asked whether the shelter wing had a name. Octavia said her grandmother called it the Lantern Rooms. Women arrived there when the city had made them invisible. They left with new papers, new work, sometimes new lives. "That is love," I said. Octavia whispered, "Sometimes." Her eyes fell to my mouth again. This time, she did not look away immediately. I felt the air narrow between us, felt the old fear and new wanting stand shoulder to shoulder inside me. Then Calder's call lit her phone. Octavia shut her eyes with the expression of a woman considering murder through proper channels. I laughed because otherwise I might have begged. Calder's next move was not subtle. He called a special board session and claimed Octavia had allowed an unqualified outsider to handle protected materials because of personal attachment. He did not say my name kindly. He said it like a stain. I was not in the room, but Octavia told me later she had corrected him before he reached the second syllable. Tessa appeared at the closing bookshop that afternoon because Harm often has excellent timing. She said she had heard rumors about me and Octavia. Her concern wore perfume. I kept packing my tools. Tessa watched the movement of my hands and said, "You always did confuse being useful with being loved." This time, the sentence did not collapse me. It made me tired. I told her Octavia valued my work. Tessa smiled with the old tenderness weaponized. Of course she does. For now. The words found their target because Tessa had helped build it. For now was the shape of every room I had ever occupied. I looked at the boxes around me and realized she wanted me homeless inside myself again. Before she left, Tessa placed a blank envelope on the counter. Inside was a photograph of me leaving the penthouse after the storm, wrapped in Octavia's blanket. No caption, no threat, just implication sharpened into paper. My stomach went cold. Tessa said, "Be careful which powerful women you let make you visible." Then she walked out with the satisfaction of a person who had opened a wound and called it wisdom. Nori arrived 5 minutes later and found me staring at the envelope. She read my face before the contents. "Nope," she said, already angry. "We are not letting a woman with abandonment highlights narrate your life." I laughed because Nori could still find a joke in the throat of panic. Then she hugged me hard enough to make my ribs remember they had support. I brought the envelope to Octavia because secrecy had already ruined enough rooms in my life. She opened it, saw the photograph, and went very still. Not embarrassed, not guilty. Furious in a way that made the air organize itself. "Did she threaten you?" she asked. I said not exactly. Octavia's voice lowered. "Women like Tessa survive on not exactly." I expected her to step back. Instead, she gave me options. Legal response, silence, controlled disclosure, or letting the photograph die of boredom. Each option included consequences, none included pressure. I asked whether she was angry at me. Octavia looked almost offended. "I am angry that someone believes your shame is a useful tool." The relief that moved through me was so large it hurt. I sat because my knees had become decorative. Octavia poured tea with the precision of someone preventing herself from doing something less polite. I do not want to be another person who manages your choices, she said. I looked at her hands. Sometimes I wish you would be less noble. Her cup stopped midair. I regretted the words immediately, and not at all. Octavia set the cup down. You do not, she said quietly. You want certainty without debt. My throat tightened. She knew me too well already, and somehow not enough. Maybe I want you to admit this is not just ethics, I said. The studio went silent enough to hear rain beginning. Octavia turned toward the window, which I had learned meant she was organizing pain into sentences. It has never been just ethics, she said. My breath caught. It has been ethics because of what else it is. That was the most Octavia confession imaginable. Careful enough to survive cross-examination and devastating enough to ruin me anyway. I stepped closer. She heard me and did not turn. I saw her hand close around her own wrist, holding herself in place. That small act of restraint made me ache. Octavia, I said. She whispered, do not make me good at resisting you tonight. The sentence landed between us like lightning striking without sound. We faced each other with rain racing down the glass behind us. I was close enough to see the places her control had frayed, the parted breath, the lowered lashes, the mouth that had told boardrooms no and now seemed to be asking me everything. I could have kissed her. I think she would have let me. Then the studio door opened. Calder stood in the doorway with two board aides behind him and a smile that curdled the room. Octavia moved first, not toward me, but between Calder and the archive table. This is a restricted workspace, she said. He looked from her to me, collecting proximity like evidence. I felt old shame rise. Octavia's hand did not reach for me. Her body still made a wall. Calder demanded immediate access to the restored materials. I told him the pages were mid-stabilization and moving them would cause damage. He said he would decide what damage was acceptable. I surprised myself by laughing once, not because it was funny, because men like Calder always believed acceptable damage was whatever happened to someone else's hands. Octavia asked me what moving the materials would do. She asked me in front of Calder, giving my expertise the room he had tried to take. I answered clearly. Fiber loss, ink migration, total compromise of pressure evidence. Calder's jaw tightened. Octavia looked at him. There is your decision, she said, made by the person qualified to make it. Calder left with a threat dressed as procedure. Octavia watched him go with the stillness of a blade returned to its sheath. When the door closed, she turned to me and the fury vanished into concern so fast it frightened me. Are you all right? She asked. I wanted to say yes. My mouth betrayed me. No. Octavia lowered herself beside me, not touching until I nodded. Even then, she placed her hand on the edge of the stool, not my body. Breathe with me, she said. I hated how quickly I obeyed. 4 counts in, 4 out. The storm beat the glass. My shame loosened one finger at a time. She stayed until my breathing belonged to me again. Only after I steadied did she offer her hand palm up. I looked at it, then at her. There was no demand in the gesture, no performance, no rescue narrative waiting to be rewarded. I placed my hand in hers. Her fingers closed gently around mine. It was the first time we held hands without an audience, and it felt more dangerous than the scandal. Her hand was warm, dry, perfectly still except for the pulse at her wrist. I stared at our joined fingers as if they were evidence from a better life. This is not leverage, she said. I smiled, shaky and exhausted. You say the strangest romantic things? Her eyes lifted. That was romantic? I squeezed her hand once. For you, terrifyingly. She almost smiled, then looked at our hands like she was memorizing the boundary she had finally crossed. That was when my phone buzzed. Nori had sent a link. A gossip account had posted the photograph, the studio contract, and a caption implying I had traded archive access for Octavia's bed. The room went cold. Octavia's hand tightened once, then released mine. Nori arrived breathless 20 minutes later, carrying rage and a portable charger. By then, my name had become an argument online. Former shop girl, secret lover, paid favorite. Octavia's mistake. I read until the words blurred, then stopped because self-harm sometimes looks like refreshing a page. Nori took the phone and said, "No more volunteering for the comment section, guillotine." Octavia stood by the window, expression unreadable in the way that meant she was blaming herself with exquisite efficiency. I wanted her to come closer. She did not. "I should have anticipated this," she said. The old fear answered before I could stop it. Maybe Tessa was right. Maybe people like you make people like me visible only when it costs us. Her face changed as if I had struck something delicate and central. I regretted it immediately, but hurt had already put on armor. Octavia said, "If my presence has made your life unsafe, I will remove it from the work." That sounded noble. It sounded unbearable. I laughed once, sharp and awful. "You make distance sound like care." She left after that, because we were both too frightened to stay honest. The studio became enormous again. Nori sat with me on the floor while I pretended not to cry. She did not defend Octavia too quickly, which I loved her for. She only said, "Sometimes careful people hurt you by removing the very thing you wanted them to risk." For 3 days, Octavia communicated through emails copied to legal counsel and the archive manager. Every message was precise, respectful, devastating. Tea stopped appearing. The studio fridge remained stocked, which was worse. Care without presence felt like a ghost refusing to leave. I worked because the work deserved better than my heartbreak, but every restored page accused me of hiding. The next review happened without Octavia beside me. She sat at the far end, not absent enough to be gone, not close enough to be comfort. I presented the lantern room's evidence while Calder watched for cracks. My voice shook on the first sentence, then steadied. I had learned something from Octavia after all. A room could be given. It could also be taken. Calder produced a forged memo claiming the lantern rooms had been private suites, not shelter spaces. The paper was aged badly, the ink too even, the fold lines wrong. I saw it before anyone asked. My body went calm in the way it did when work took over. He had tried to imitate history. He had forgotten that damage has grammar. I explained the forgery without looking at Octavia. Not because I did not need her, but because I needed to know I could stand even when she was being careful somewhere else. The board listened. Calder's smile thinned. At the end, Octavia asked one question. "Ms. Merritt, in your professional opinion, who benefits from rushing these materials out of your custody?" Our eyes met across the table. The question was evidence, but beneath it lived trust. Not rescue, not romance in public costume. Trust. I answered, "Anyone who needs the archive discredited before the gala vote." Octavia nodded once, barely. It felt like her hand in mine again. Calder looked away first, and I treasured that like a petty woman with excellent cause. After the meeting, we stood alone in the boardroom with too much polished table between us. Octavia said I had been extraordinary. I said thank you like a stranger. Pain moved across her face, quick and controlled. "Lena," she said. My name in her voice almost undid me. I looked at the windows instead. "Do not disappear from me and call it protection." She turned toward the glass. "I do not know how to want you without fearing the shape of my power." That stopped me. Her honesty had no decoration, no seductive angle. Just fear, old and disciplined. I crossed half the distance, then stopped because the rest had to be hers. "Then learn," I said. "Do not make me pay for your fear by losing you." Octavia looked at me then, really looked, And for once she did not hide the wanting. It was there, luminous and frightening, under the control. "I am in love with you," she said. No preface, no appendix, no legal language. The room tilted. I had imagined the words so many times that the reality of them made me useless. I did not answer quickly enough. Her face closed by one careful inch, and I hated that she thought silence meant refusal. "Do not rescue me from the sentence," I whispered. "I am trying to survive receiving it." That broke something in her. Not visibly, not enough for anyone else. But I saw it. Her eyes softened until they almost hurt to meet. I stepped close enough that our hands could have touched if either of us stopped being careful. "I am in love with you too," I said, and my voice did not shake until the end. Octavia closed her eyes, one breath, then opened them with a tenderness so controlled it nearly looked like pain. "May I hold your hand?" she asked. I laughed through tears. "Yes, you impossible woman." She held my hand like a promise she was afraid to press too hard. We did not kiss. The door was glass, the vote was coming, and scandal still breathed under the hotel floorboards. But we stood there until dusk made our reflections look like women from another life, one where love did not need permission from fear before it entered. The gala arrived wearing thunderclouds. Nori helped me prepare and threatened to hide snacks in my clutch because she distrusted wealthy appetizers. I stood before the mirror in emerald silk and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because she was transformed, because she had not vanished. Nori squeezed my shoulders and said, "Go make history behave." Octavia waited in the lobby beneath the chandelier, and for a second I forgot the board, the archive, the gossip, every cruel mouth waiting upstairs. She saw me and went still. Really still. It was the kind of silence that makes a woman forgive mirrors. "Lena," she said. Only my name, but it arrived dressed as worship. She offered her arm, not her hand. The gesture was public, elegant, survivable. I took it anyway and felt her breath catch. "Are you ready?" she asked. I looked up the staircase toward the gala hall. Ready felt too clean a word. I was afraid, angry, proud, in love, and carrying evidence in a blank envelope. "No," I said, "but I am coming." The gala hall turned when we entered. 100 faces, 100 judgments, all polished enough to reflect back nothing useful. Octavia's arm remained steady beneath my hand. I could feel the restraint in her body, the urge to shield me, and the choice not to make me smaller by doing it too soon. That was love, I thought. Not rescue. Timing. Tessa found me before the first speech. She looked beautiful, of course. Cruel women often do, because the world mistakes polish for proof. Her eyes moved over my dress, then to Octavia across the room. "Enjoying your upgrade?" she asked. For once, the old blade missed the vital place. I smiled, small and tired. "I am enjoying being heard." Tessa's smile faltered because she had expected either defense or collapse. I gave her neither. I told her she had not made me too much. She had only been unwilling to make room. The words did not heal everything. They were not magic, but they left my mouth cleanly, and that was enough for the moment. Calder made his move during the archive unveiling. He suggested postponing the vote due to ethical concerns, compromised evidence, and inappropriate attachment. He said the last phrase while looking at me. The room leaned toward scandal like flowers toward poisoned light. Octavia stood very still. I knew that stillness now. It was not emptiness. It was aim. I stepped beside Octavia before she could answer for me. Her gaze flicked to my face, asking. I nodded once. Then I placed the blank envelope on the display table and explained what Calder had forged, what the old paper proved, and why the lantern rooms had always belonged to the women the hotel promised to shelter. My voice carried farther than fear expected. I showed them the pressure marks, the water damage, the impossible ink on Calder's memo. I explained that paper remembers touch. It remembers pressure, sequence, weather, fraud. By the time I finished, Calder's confidence had begun to peel. Tessa stood near the back, pale now, realizing perhaps that some women stop being easy to narrate once they learn their own evidence. Octavia did not gloat. That would have been too simple. She looked at Calder with the exhausted precision of a woman ending a family pattern. She told the board that the properties would remain protected, the archive studio would be funded, and Calder's conflict of interest would be reviewed externally. Each sentence landed like a lock turning. Then Octavia turned to me. The room was still listening, but her expression changed into something meant only for my courage. Ms. Merritt restored more than these pages, she said. She restored the truth we were too comfortable losing. My eyes burned. She continued, voice steady. I trust her work. I trust her judgment. And I choose her place here publicly. She offered her hand palm up, the same question as always. In front of everyone, still asking. That was why I could take it. Because Octavia Sloane, who could command rooms into silence, never treated my yes as furniture. I placed my hand in hers. The gala exhaled. Her fingers closed around mine, firm and reverent. Tessa saw our joined hands. I know she did because her face changed, not with jealousy alone, but with recognition. She understood too late that Octavia had not made me visible by owning me. She had made room, and I had stepped into it. That distinction mattered more than revenge. Still, I will admit, the sight of Tessa speechless fed a small, ungenerous bird in my chest. After the vote passed, after Calder left under the escort of his own consequences, after the crowd turned from scandal to champagne, Octavia led me to the quiet side of the display. "Are you all right?" she asked. The same question, again and again, never assuming. I looked at her and laughed softly. "I think I am visible." Her face opened. "Yes," she said. "You are." This time, I asked, "May I kiss you?" Octavia's composure failed beautifully. Only for a second, but I saw it. "Yes," she said, and the words shook. The kiss was soft, public, and somehow more private than the library fire. Her hand came to my waist, mine to her cheek, and the ballroom became nothing more than weather outside a locked room finally opened. We escaped to the winter garden before anyone could congratulate us into exhaustion. Rain softened the glass overhead. Octavia kept my hand in hers, thumb still careful, still asking even after I had kissed her in public. "You can relax," I said. "Can I?" she asked. I leaned into her shoulder. "A little. I will supervise." She laughed against my hair, and the sound nearly undid the entire evening. We stood among lemon trees while the gala hummed behind the doors. Octavia said the studio funding would begin immediately. I said she was making business announcements during a romantic moment. She said, "I am trying to offer stability seductively." I told her she was alarmingly good at it. I touched her cheek because I could, because permission had become a language we were both learning to speak fluently. Octavia closed her eyes like the touch cost her restraint and gave her peace at once. "I am still afraid of doing this badly," she admitted. I kissed the corner of her mouth. "Then do it honestly. We can edit as we go." Weeks later, the Carriage Studio became official. Not Octavia's favor, not my temporary corner. A funded archive and repair room with my name in the paperwork, though I made sure the visible plaque remained discreet and unreadable in photographs. I hired 2 assistants by spring. The first time I unlocked the studio as director, I cried into a clean cloth and blamed dust. Octavia still brought tea, though now she knocked on the director's door with theatrical respect. I told her she was ridiculous. She said respecting authority suited her. Then she set the cup near my elbow, exactly outside the danger zone. Some rituals did not need to grow grander after love became named. Some only needed to continue, faithful and warm. Nori visited with pastries and declared herself spiritually responsible for our romance because she had predicted disaster accurately. She admired the studio, inspected the fridge, and announced that Octavia's feeding schedule had evolved into domestic policy. I told her not to say domestic too loudly. Nori pointed at the spare cardigan folded over my chair and said, "Baby, the evidence is wearing cashmere." By autumn, I had moved into the apartment above the garden because I wanted to, not because rent had cornered me. We kept some spaces separate out of habit and respect, but most nights ended on the same sofa, Octavia reading beside me, my feet tucked under her thigh, tea cooling forgotten between chapters. Home, I learned, could be chosen daily without becoming a cage. Sometimes she still asked before touching my hair. Sometimes I teased her for it. Sometimes I answered yes with such seriousness that her eyes darkened and both of us forgot the tea. Love did not make Octavia careless. It made her braver. Love did not make me less hungry. It taught me hunger could be welcomed without becoming a debt. We kept the antique key in a small bowl by the apartment door, not because it opened anything useful anymore. The old hidden room had been restored, the archives secured, the lantern rooms protected. We kept it because it reminded us that wrong doors are not always mistakes. Sometimes they are invitations that arrive before you believe you deserve to enter. Octavia came up behind me one rainy morning and placed her hand near mine on the window ledge, waiting. I linked our fingers. Outside, the city shone clean and temporary. Inside, tea steamed, books dried, and the woman who had first seen me through a wrong key stayed beside me without closing the door. Love was not rescue. Love was room. Love was being chosen, clearly and freely, again.